My name is Robert H. Kearns, and I am 74 years old. I have lived my entire life here, in the north of Washington, among the wet pines and the fog that never fully dissipates. It clings to the valleys like something alive, something patient. Since Helen died, 9 winters ago now, though sometimes it feels like yesterday and sometimes like a lifetime, I have lived alone in this cabin I built with my own hands. It is small but solid. The tin roof sings when the rain falls, and the rain falls almost every day, a percussion of drops that becomes white noise after a while, the kind of sound that fills the silence without ever really breaking it. I have an old battery-powered radio, a generator I only turn on at night when the cold becomes unbearable, and a digital camera my daughter gave me on the last Christmas we spent together. That was before she decided that she could not keep looking after me from a distance, before the phone calls became shorter and the visits stopped altogether. I do not blame her. This place has a way of pushing people out, of making the outside world seem both impossibly distant and unbearably necessary. She has her own life now, her own family. I am just a memory that occasionally surfaces, uncomfortable and persistent. My routine is simple, almost ritualistic in its repetition. I wake at 5 before the sun considers rising, when the darkness is still thick and the cold seeps through the gaps in the floorboards. I boil coffee on the wood stove, the smell of it mingling with the scent of burning cedar and the dampness that permeates everything here. The first cup is always the best, strong, bitter, almost harsh, and I drink it standing by the window, watching the shapes of the trees emerge slowly from the pre-dawn gloom. Sometimes, if the fog is thin enough, I can see the mountains in the distance, their peaks white with snow even in spring. After coffee, I take the leftover bread, usually hard by then, sometimes touched with green at the edges, and carry it to the deer that appear near the fence line. They know my schedule better than I do. They wait there, silent and watchful, their eyes reflecting whatever light manages to break through the clouds. I have named a few of them, though I know better than to get attached. One winter is all it takes for a deer to disappear, to become just another absence in a landscape already full of them. But the ritual comforts me, the act of feeding something and of providing, even in this small way. It makes the day feel purposeful. The rest of the morning is dedicated to work. I chop wood, the axe heavy in my hands, the sound of it splitting logs echoing across the clearing. My shoulders ache more than they used to, and my hands cramp in the cold, but the work is necessary. Winter is always coming here, even in summer. I repair the fences where the wire has sagged or broken, check the chicken coop for damage, clear the fallen branches from the path that leads down to the creek. The forest is always trying to reclaim what I have carved out for myself, and I am always pushing it back, though sometimes I wonder why I bother. What am I defending? What am I preserving? In the afternoons, when the work is done and my body aches with a familiar tiredness, I sit on the porch and watch the valley. This is my favorite time, when the light turns soft and golden, when the shadows grow long and the world seems to pause between day and night. I watch for animals, a bear moving through the underbrush, an elk crossing the stream, sometimes a hawk circling overhead, riding the thermals that rise from the valley floor. The silence here is different from any other silence I have known. It is dense, heavy, almost conscious. It presses against my ears and fills my chest. Sometimes I swear it listens. Sometimes I feel it thinking. I do not have television or internet, just the radio, and even that is temperamental, crackling with static more often than delivering any coherent signal. Occasionally, I hear the drone of a military helicopter passing over the mountains, the sound low and ominous, and I wonder what they are doing up there. There is an old government base in the area, decommissioned since the 80s or so they say. I have never seen it, but I know it is there, somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a relic of Cold War paranoia. The helicopters remind me that I am not as isolated as I sometimes feel, that the world beyond these trees still exists, still watches. When the sun sets, the cold arrives quickly, descending from the mountains like something physical, something you can almost touch. I close the windows, seal the drafts with rags and tape, and light the fire in the stone hearth. The wood crackles and pops, releasing sparks that dance briefly in the air before dying. It is the most human sound in this place, the sound of something warm and alive in the midst of all this cold stillness. I sit by the fire and listen to it, letting my thoughts wander, letting the day fade into memory. Helen used to say I was too comfortable with solitude, that it would consume me if I let it. She was probably right. But after she died, after the cancer took her slowly and painfully over the course of 2 years, the solitude became something else. It became refuge. It became the only thing that made sense. The world outside, the noise, the speed, the endless chatter felt alien to me, unbearable. Here, in the quiet, I could still hear her sometimes, in the creak of the floorboards, in the sigh of the wind through the pines, in the way the light fell across the kitchen table in the late afternoon. She was gone, but not entirely. Not yet. I do not know how much longer I can stay here. My body is failing in small, incremental ways. Joints that stiffen, a cough that will not go away, moments of dizziness that come without warning. My children think I should move to a facility, somewhere with nurses and clean white walls and scheduled activities, but the thought of it terrifies me more than dying alone in this cabin. At least here, I have purpose. At least here, I am still myself. The rain picks up again as evening deepens into night, drumming harder on the tin roof, and I add another log to the fire. The flames leap higher, casting shadows that dance across the walls, and I think about tomorrow, about the wood that needs chopping and the fence that needs mending. I think about the deer waiting by the fence line, patient and silent. I think about how small my world has become, and how vast it feels at the same time. Outside, beyond the circle of light cast by the cabin, the forest waits. It has always been there, indifferent and eternal, and it will be there long after I am gone. But lately, I've begun to feel that it is not as indifferent as I once thought. Lately, I have begun to feel that something in those trees is watching, waiting, considering. I tell myself it is just the isolation, just my mind playing tricks in the absence of human company. But deep down, in a place I am afraid to examine too closely, I know it is something else. Something I do not yet have words for. The fire burns low and I close my eyes, letting the warmth seep into my bones. Tomorrow will come, as it always does, and I will wake to the same routine, the same quiet, the same inexplicable feeling that I am no longer alone. But tonight, I am content to sit here, to listen to the rain, to wait for whatever comes next. It was late March when I first began to notice that something had changed. Not in any way I could articulate at first, not in any way that seemed significant enough to worry about. Just small things, details that caught at the edge of my awareness and then slipped away before I could examine them properly. A shift in the quality of the silence, perhaps, a feeling of being observed that I could not shake, even in the middle of the day when the sun occasionally broke through the clouds and the world seemed ordinary and explicable. The first concrete sign came in the form of sounds. Heavy footsteps in the woods near the chicken coop, around 2 in the morning. I woke to them, my heart already racing before my mind fully registered what had pulled me from sleep. The footsteps were deliberate, unhurried, the kind of sound that suggests weight and intention. My first thought was a bear, drawn by the scent of the chickens or perhaps the compost heap I kept behind the shed. Bears are common enough here, especially in spring when they emerge hungry from hibernation, and I have learned to coexist with them as long as they keep their distance. I reached for the flashlight I keep by the bed, pulled on my boots without bothering to lace them, and grabbed the rifle from its place by the door. The metal was cold against my palms, and my breath came out in visible clouds as I stepped onto the porch. The night was perfectly still, no wind, no movement in the trees, just that silence again, that heavy, waiting silence that seems to have weight and substance. I swept the flashlight beam across the clearing, across the chicken coop, across the edge of the tree line where the darkness pooled thick and impenetrable. Nothing, no movement, no eyes reflecting back at me, no sound except my own breathing and the creak of the porch boards under my feet. But the smell, there was a smell in the air that had not been there before, sweet and metallic at the same time, like meat left too long in the sun, like copper and rot and something else I could not identify. It made my stomach turn, made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way that felt primal, instinctive. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer, listening and waiting. But whatever had been there was gone, or had stopped moving, or was simply better at being still than I was at detecting it. I went back inside and locked the door, though I am not sure what good a lock would do against a bear. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. I sat by the window with the rifle across my lap, watching the darkness beyond the glass, watching for movement that never came. When dawn finally arrived, grey and reluctant, I went out to check for tracks. There was nothing I could find, though the ground was soft from recent rain and should have held prints easily. Just that smell again, faint now but still present, hanging in the cold morning air. Days passed, and I tried to convince myself it had been nothing, just a bear passing through, just my imagination amplified by isolation and too many nights alone. But then the chickens began to act strangely. They would not come out of the coop in the mornings, huddling together in the far corner, making small distressed sounds that chickens make when they sense a predator. When I forced them out, several were missing feathers, as if something had grabbed them but let go. I checked for foxes, for raccoons, for any of the usual suspects, but found nothing. And then I found the prints. In the mud near the fence line, pressed deep into the soft earth, there were tracks unlike any I had seen before. They were enormous. I measured one with the wooden ruler I keep in the shed, and it was nearly 16 inches long, longer than my own foot by half. But it was not just the size that disturbed me. It was the shape. They were vaguely human, with what looked like 5 toes, but elongated, distorted, as if the bones underneath were not quite right. The depth of them suggested incredible weight, far more than any man could account for, far more than seemed possible for any animal I knew. I stood there for a long time, staring at those prints, trying to find a rational explanation. The rain could have distorted them, I told myself. Water running through the tracks could have made them larger, deeper, stranger than they actually were. But even as I thought it, I knew it was not true. These were real. These were fresh, and whatever made them had been here, had walked along my fence line, had stood perhaps where I was standing now. I took photographs with the digital camera, though my hands were shaking and the images came out blurry. I thought about showing them to someone, but who? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and we barely spoke. The town was farther still, and I had no desire to be dismissed as a crazy old man seeing monsters in the woods. So I kept it to myself, filed it away as another strange occurrence in a place that seemed increasingly full of them. The following week brought something worse. I began to hear voices. Not loud, not clear, but low and distant, like someone speaking just beyond the range of comprehension. They came at odd times, in the middle of the afternoon when I was chopping wood, late at night when I was sitting by the fire, early in the morning when I was feeding the deer. Always from outside, always from the direction of the trees. I would stop what I was doing and listen, straining to make out words, but the moment I focused on them, they would stop. The silence would return, absolute and mocking. One evening I heard my name. I am certain of it. I was washing dishes at the kitchen sink, the window open to let out the steam, when I heard it whispered from somewhere in the darkness beyond the porch. Robert, just that, just my name, spoken in a voice that was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. I dropped the plate I was holding and it shattered in the sink, but I barely registered it. I grabbed the flashlight and went to the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. I called out, my voice sounding small and foolish in the vastness of the night, but there was no answer, just the wind beginning to pick up, moving through the pines with a sound like breathing. I stood there until the cold became unbearable, until my fingers went numb and my breath came in ragged gasps, and then I went back inside and locked every door, every window, every possible entry point. That night, I slept with the lights on and the rifle within reach. I slept badly, waking every hour to check the windows, to listen for footsteps, to smell the air for that sweet metallic odor, but nothing came. The night passed slowly, agonizingly, and when morning finally arrived, I felt more exhausted than I had before sleep. This became a pattern, the broken sleep, the constant vigilance, the sense of being watched even in broad daylight. My hands began to shake. My appetite disappeared. I lost weight I could not afford to lose. I started keeping notes, documenting everything, the times I heard sounds, the locations of tracks when I found them, the behavior of the animals. I thought that if I could organize it, analyze it, find a pattern, then maybe I could understand what was happening. Maybe I could regain some sense of control. But the notes only made things worse. Reading them back, seeing the progression laid out in my own handwriting, made it impossible to dismiss as imagination. Something was out there. Something was coming closer. and I had no idea what it wanted or how to stop it. The smell returned more frequently now, sometimes so strong it made my eyes water. The chickens stopped laying eggs. The deer no longer came to the fence line in the mornings, and when I went looking for them, I found their trails leading away from my property, as if they had decided collectively that this place was no longer safe. Even the birds seemed fewer, their songs muted or absent altogether. The forest was emptying out, becoming a hollow shell of itself, and I was being left behind in it. I thought about leaving, about packing what I could carry and walking to the main road, flagging down a car, going anywhere but here. But something kept me rooted. Pride, maybe, stubbornness, or perhaps something deeper. A sense that if I left, if I ran, I would be admitting that I was powerless, that my entire life in this place had been built on an illusion of control. And more than that, a strange certainty that leaving would not help, that whatever this was would follow me, that I was somehow connected to it now in a way I did not understand. So I stayed. I reinforced the doors, kept the rifle loaded, and waited. I did not know what I was waiting for, but I knew it was coming. I could feel it in the quality of the air, in the way the light seemed to change even when the sun was hidden behind clouds. Something was gathering in the woods around my cabin, something that had noticed me and decided I was worth its attention. And whether that was a blessing or a curse, I could not yet tell. On a grey afternoon in early April, with the sky hanging low and heavy like wet wool, I decided to test the camera my daughter had given me. I had been hearing sounds near the creek for several days, splashing, movement through the underbrush, something large disturbing the water. My first thought was that an elk had returned to the area, or perhaps a bear fishing for the small trout that gathered in the deeper pools. I thought it would be good to capture something on film, something ordinary and explainable, something I could show to my granddaughter the next time she visited. If she ever visited, a piece of normal life to share, proof that not everything here was strange and unsettling. I set up the camera on a fallen log about 20 feet from the water's edge, angling it to capture the widest view of the creek and the tree line beyond. The device felt alien in my hands, all plastic and buttons and digital displays that I did not fully understand. My daughter had shown me how to use it, but that had been years ago and I had only used it a handful of times since. Still, I managed to get it recording, the little red light blinking to confirm that it was working, and then I left it there and returned to the cabin. 2 hours, I thought. That should be enough time to catch something if anything was going to appear. The afternoon passed slowly, as afternoons do here. I busied myself with small tasks, sharpening the axe, organizing the woodpile, cleaning the rifle, but my mind kept returning to the camera, wondering what it was seeing, what it might be recording. There was a nervous energy in me that I had not felt in a long time, a mixture of anticipation and unease. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the work, but it persisted, nagging at me like a splinter I could not remove. When I finally went back to retrieve the camera, the light was beginning to fade and a cold wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain. The camera was where I had left it, undisturbed, still blinking its red eye at the empty creek. I turned it off, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and walked back to the cabin, my boots squelching in the mud, my breath visible in the cooling air. I did not watch the footage right away. I ate dinner first, canned soup heated on the stove, bread that was going stale, a cup of bitter coffee. I washed the dishes, stoked the fire, settled into the chair by the hearth. Only then did I take out the camera and press play. The first 10 minutes were exactly what I had expected. The creek flowing, the sound of water over stones, the occasional bird passing through the frame, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, their shadows shifting across the muddy bank. Nothing unusual, nothing worth noting. I almost fast-forwarded, almost skipped ahead, but something made me keep watching at normal speed, though feeling, intuitive and wordless, that I should not miss anything. At the 14-minute mark, the quality of the image changed. The light seemed to dim, though there had been no clouds visible before. The shadows grew longer, deeper, as if the sun had suddenly dropped below the horizon. And then, movement. At first, I thought it was just the wind moving through the underbrush, or perhaps a deer emerging from the trees. But as the shape came more fully into view, I realized it was neither of those things. So it was enormous, far larger than any deer, larger than any bear I had ever seen. It moved slowly, deliberately, partially obscured by the fog that had begun to gather along the creek. The figure was dark, covered in what looked like hair or fur that hung in long, matted strands. It walked upright on two legs, with a gait that was almost human but not quite. There was something wrong with the proportions, with the way the joints bent, with the length of the arms that hung at its sides. My hands began to shake, making the small screen blur and jump, but I could not stop watching. The creature, I did not know what else to call it, stopped at the water's edge and stood there perfectly still, as if listening or waiting. The camera's focus struggled, trying to sharpen the image, trying to make sense of what it was seeing. And then, slowly, the figure turned its head and looked directly at the lens. The face, if it could be called a face, was a mixture of features that should not have existed together. There were eyes, definitely eyes, large and dark and unmistakably aware. There was a nose, a mouth, a forehead creased with what looked like age or worry or both, but the shape of it was wrong, elongated and flattened at the same time, covered in the same dark hair that covered the rest of the body. The expression, and there was an expression, I am certain of it, was one of anger and sadness intermingled, a look of profound exhaustion and barely contained fury. We stared at each other through the camera, across time and space, and I felt something shift inside me. A recognition, perhaps. An acknowledgement that what I was seeing was not just an animal, not just a creature acting on instinct. There was intelligence there, consciousness, something that thought and felt and knew. The realization was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, a vertigo of understanding that made the room spin around me. And then it spoke. The voice came through the camera's small speaker, rough and deep, resonating in a way that made my chest tighten. The words were clear, unmistakable, spoken in English with an accent I could not place. Do not film us. Not a request, not a threat, just a statement, delivered with the weight of absolute authority. The creature held my gaze for another moment, its eyes boring into the lens, boring into me, and then it turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the fog as completely as if it had never been there at all. The video continued for another hour, but there was nothing more, just the creek, the trees, the gathering darkness. I sat there in my chair for a long time after the footage ended, the camera still in my hands, my mind struggling to process what I had seen. I rewound it, watched it again, looking for signs of manipulation, for evidence that it was fake, that my eyes had deceived me. But there was nothing. The footage was real. The creature was real. The voice was real. I had proof, undeniable and concrete, that something impossible existed in these woods. I watched the video dozens of times that night, until the battery died and I had to plug the camera into charge. I studied every frame, every detail, trying to extract some additional piece of information that would make it all make sense. But the more I watched, the less sense it made. The creature's proportions, its movement, the way the light fell across its fur, all of it was wrong in ways I could not articulate. And the voice, that deep, resonant voice saying those 4 simple words. It played over and over in my mind until I could hear it, even when the video was not running. When the mailman came the next day to deliver a package, I showed him the video. I could not help myself. I needed someone else to see it, to confirm that I was not losing my mind, that what I had captured was real. He watched it once, his expression shifting from curiosity to skepticism, to something like pity. He laughed, not unkindly, and said it was probably just a man in a costume, some kids playing a prank, a trick of light and shadow that my old camera had misinterpreted. He handed the camera back to me and left, driving his truck down the dirt road faster than necessary, as if he could not wait to get away. He never came back after that. The mail stopped being delivered to my door and started being left at the box by the main road, a mile away. I would walk down to collect it once a week, and sometimes I would see his truck pass by without slowing, his eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look in my direction. I had become something he wanted to avoid, a problem he did not want to engage with. I understood. I did not blame him. If someone had shown me that video a year ago, I probably would have reacted the same way. It was too much, too strange, too far outside the boundaries of acceptable reality. People do not want to believe in things like this. They want the world to be orderly and predictable, governed by rules they understand. The idea that something like this creature could exist, could be real, disrupts everything. It forces you to question what else might be out there, what else might be hiding just beyond the edge of perception. I kept the video on the camera, but I stopped showing it to people. I made a copy on the old computer I kept in the back room, saved it to a USB drive that I hid in a drawer. I was afraid, not just of the creature, but of what might happen if the wrong people saw the footage. I'd heard stories of government agencies confiscating evidence, of witnesses being discredited or silenced. I did not know if those stories were true, but I was not willing to take the risk. At night, alone in the cabin with the fire burning low, I would think about what the creature had said. Do not film us, not me, us, which meant there were more of them, that this was not a single anomaly but a population, a community. They lived here in these mountains, in these forests, hidden from human eyes, and I had stumbled into their territory, built my cabin in their space, disrupted their existence with my presence. The weight of that realization pressed down on me like a physical thing. I was the intruder here, not them. I was the one who did not belong. And now that they knew I was aware of them, now that I had violated their privacy by recording them, what would they do? Would they leave? Would they drive me out? Or would they do something worse, something I could not predict or prepare for? Sleep became impossible. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every sound, every creak, every rustle of wind through the trees. The camera sat on the table across the room, and I could feel its presence like a weight, a reminder of what I knew and what I could not unknow. The video existed. The creature existed. And my life, whatever it had been before, was irrevocably changed. I thought about destroying the footage, deleting it from the camera and the computer, smashing the USB drive and scattering the pieces. Maybe then they would leave me alone. Maybe then I could return to the simple life I had before, the routine of chopping wood and feeding deer and watching the sun set over the valley. But I could not bring myself to do it. The footage was proof. It was evidence, and despite everything, despite the fear and the sleepless nights and the growing sense that I had made a terrible mistake, I wanted that proof to exist. I wanted someone, someday, to know that I had not imagined it, that I had not gone mad in my isolation. The creature's face haunted me, those eyes full of intelligence and sorrow and warning. I kept seeing it, even when I closed my eyes, even when I tried to think of other things. And the voice, deep and resonant, speaking those words with such finality, "Do not film us." It was not just a command. It was a boundary, a line I had crossed without knowing it existed. And now I was on the other side, in a place I did not understand, facing consequences I could not foresee. The rain began again that night, drumming on the roof, and I sat by the fire with the camera in my lap, wondering what I had done and what would come next. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Not in the way I once understood it, anyway. Those long, unbroken hours of darkness, where the mind surrenders and the body repairs itself. Now sleep came in fragments, in stolen moments between waking terrors, each one shorter than the last. I would drift off from sheer exhaustion, only to jolt awake minutes later, heart racing, certain I had heard something. A sound at the window, a weight on the porch, the soft, deliberate percussion of something moving just beyond the walls. The knocking started in the second week of April. Soft at first, almost tentative, as if whatever was out there was testing my response, gauging my awareness. 3 taps, evenly spaced in on the wall near my bedroom window. I would lie there in the dark, every muscle rigid, listening to my own breathing, waiting to see if the sound would repeat. Sometimes it did. Sometimes it moved, to a different wall, to the door, to the window on the opposite side of the cabin. It never came from the same place twice in one night, as if the source was circling, studying, learning the architecture of my sanctuary. I told myself it was branches, the wind pushing limbs against the siding, a natural explanation for a natural sound. But the night was often still, the air motionless, and the branches nearest the cabin were ones I had trimmed back myself to prevent exactly this kind of disturbance. And branches do not knock with rhythm, with intention, with the patience of something that knows you are listening. I set up additional cameras, positioning them at each corner of the cabin, angled to capture any approach. I bought motion-activated lights online, and installed them myself. Even though my hands shook so badly I dropped half the screws into the dirt. I placed audio recorders near the windows, primitive devices I had found at a yard sale years ago, hoping to capture something concrete, something I could analyze in daylight, when fear did not cloud my judgment so completely. The first few nights yielded nothing. The cameras showed empty clearings, shadows shifting as clouds passed over the moon, the occasional deer or raccoon moving through the frame. The audio recorders captured wind, rain, the distant hoot of an owl. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. I began to wonder if I had imagined everything, if the isolation had finally broken something essential in my mind and I was experiencing some kind of psychological collapse. But then the breathing started. I heard it first on the recordings. A low rhythmic sound, almost like the tide pulling in and out, mechanical in its regularity but organic in its texture. It was there in the background of the audio, underneath the ambient noise of the forest, steady and unmistakable. I played it back dozens of times, turning up the volume until the speakers distorted, holding the device close to my ear, breathing, something standing near the cabin just out of sight of the cameras, inhaling and exhaling with the patience of something that has all the time in the world. The realization that I was being watched, studied, observed with the same clinical attention I had been directing outward was almost worse than any direct confrontation would have been. It meant intelligence. It meant purpose. Whatever was out there was not acting on instinct or curiosity. It was conducting some kind of assessment, gathering information, making decisions based on what it learned. I began to hear footsteps circling the cabin at night, heavy, deliberate, moving slowly through the underbrush and over the gravel. The pattern was always the same, a complete circuit of the property, sometimes clockwise, sometimes counterclockwise, taking anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes to complete. I would lie in bed and track the sound as it moved from the western wall to the northern corner, past the woodpile, around to the chicken coop, along the southern fence line, and back to where it started. And then silence, as if whatever it was had satisfied itself and returned to the forest to process what it had observed. One night, I worked up the courage to go outside during one of these circuits. I waited until I heard the footsteps approaching the eastern side of the cabin, then grabbed my flashlight and rifle and burst through the front door, swinging the beam wildly across the clearing. The footsteps stopped immediately. The silence that followed was so complete, it felt like a presence itself, a weight pressing against my eardrums. I called out, my voice cracking, asking if anyone was there, demanding that they show themselves. Nothing. I stood there for 5 minutes, maybe longer, the cold seeping through my clothes, the rifle growing heavy in my hands. Finally, I retreated back inside, locked the door and sat against it until dawn, listening. When I reviewed the camera footage the next morning, I saw myself standing in the yard, the flashlight beam swinging erratically, my breath visible in the cold air. But the camera that should have captured whatever was on the eastern side of the cabin showed only empty space. No movement, no figure, no disturbance in the grass or leaves. Either the camera had failed to capture it, or whatever was there existed somehow outside its range of detection. That was when one of the cameras fell, or was knocked down, I cannot be certain which. I heard the crash from inside the cabin, a sharp clatter of plastic hitting stone, and I knew immediately what it was. By the time I got outside, the camera was lying on the ground, its lens cracked, the mounting bracket broken. I retrieved the memory card with trembling fingers and brought it inside to review. The footage showed the normal view, trees, shadows, the edge of the clearing, and then, abruptly, the image tilted, the ground rushing up to meet the lens. But in the frames just before the fall, in the last few seconds before the angle changed, there was something, a shape moving toward the camera, large and dark, blocking out the background. And then, unmistakably, a hand, or something like a hand. Long fingers, too many joints, covered in coarse hair that caught the moonlight. It reached toward the camera, filled the frame, and then everything went black. I saved the footage to my computer, copied it to the same USB drive where I had stored the creek video. Evidence, proof. But proof of what? That I was being harassed by something that should not exist. That I had somehow drawn the attention of a being that existed outside normal understanding. And what could I do with such proof? Who would believe it? I tried sending the videos to the local police department, attaching them to an email with a brief explanation. I kept the tone as neutral and factual as possible, describing only what I had seen and heard, making no claims about what it might be. I sent the email late at night, then sat staring at the screen, waiting for a response that never came. Days passed. A week and nothing. Finally, I drove into town and went to the police station in person. The officer at the desk, a young man I did not recognize, listened to my story with the kind of patience you reserve for children or the mentally unwell. He took my information, said they would look into it, and asked if I had been taking my medications regularly. I told him I did not take any medications. He suggested gently that perhaps I should consider it. I left the USB drive with him and walked out, feeling the weight of his pity like a physical thing on my shoulders. When I returned a week later to follow up, the same officer told me the files on the drive had been corrupted, unreadable. He handed the drive back to me and I took it home, plugged it into my computer and found it completely empty. Every file deleted, every piece of evidence erased. I had made backups. I'm not completely foolish, but the message was clear. No one wanted this information. No one wanted to believe it. And no one was going to help me. The fear that had been external began to migrate inward, settling into my chest like a cold stone. It was no longer just about what was outside the cabin, in the darkness beyond the windows. It was about what was happening inside my own mind, in the space between thought and perception. Was I really seeing these things? Were the videos real or elaborate hallucinations my traumatized brain had constructed to explain away the simpler truth of my own dissolution? I started noticing interference on the radio. The static would suddenly resolve into voices, low, distorted, speaking in words I almost but not quite understood. I would catch fragments, stop, observe, silence, warning. Whether they were directed at me or simply conversations I was overhearing, I could not tell. I would spin the dial, searching for a clear station. But the voices would follow me across the frequencies, persistent and inescapable. One night, I heard my wife's voice. Not on the radio, just in the cabin, as clear as if she were standing beside me. She said my name. That particular inflection she always used when she was worried about me. Robert Min, with the emphasis on the first syllable, the OE drawn out slightly. I spun around, expecting, hoping, terrified to see her standing there. But the room was empty. Just shadows and firelight, and the relentless sound of rain on the roof. I began to lose track of time. Days blurred together, indistinguishable from one another. I would find myself standing at the window with no memory of having walked there, or sitting at the table with a cold cup of coffee in my hands, hours old, unable to recall having poured it. Sleep deprivation does this, I knew. It fragments consciousness, makes the boundaries between states porous and unstable. But knowing the mechanism did not make it less frightening. I thought about leaving. The idea came to me more frequently now, especially in the darkest hours before dawn when the fear was at its peak. I could pack a bag, walk to the main road, flag down a car, go anywhere. Stay with my daughter, find an apartment in town, move to a city where the nights are bright and filled with human noise. But every time I considered it, I felt a strange resistance, as if some part of me knew that leaving would not solve anything. The fear was not tied to this place anymore. It had become part of me, a new organ I had grown to accommodate the impossible. And deeper than that, underneath the rational thoughts and the terror, was a terrible curiosity. I wanted to know what would happen next. I wanted to understand what these things were, what they wanted, why they had chosen to reveal themselves to me. The scientist in me, dormant for so many years, had awakened. I was observing a phenomenon that defied explanation, and despite the cost to my sanity and safety, I could not look away. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closer together, as if the forest were gradually contracting, squeezing the human space out of existence. Every sound became significant, every shadow suspect. I slept in the chair by the fire, the rifle across my lap, jolting awake at intervals to check the windows, to listen for footsteps, to smell the air for that sweet metallic odor that signaled their presence. And through it all, underneath the fear and exhaustion, a single question burned. What did they want from me? Why reveal themselves only to stay hidden? Why circle my cabin night after night without ever making direct contact? It felt like a game, a test, a slow psychological experiment with me as the unwilling subject, and I had no idea how to make it stop, or if stopping was even possible anymore. The night of April 12th began like so many others had in recent weeks, with me sitting in the chair by the fire, half awake, half dreaming, suspended in that liminal state where exhaustion blurs the boundaries of consciousness. The rain had stopped earlier in the evening, leaving the world outside wrapped in a heavy, dripping silence. I remember thinking that the quiet was worse than the sounds, that at least with the rain there was a reason for the noise, a natural explanation for every creak and drip and rustle. I must have dozed off, because I woke with a start to a sound that made my blood go cold. It was not the soft tapping I had grown accustomed to, not the rhythmic breathing or the circling footsteps. This was a crash, a deep percussive boom that shook the entire cabin. The windows rattled in their frames. Dust fell from the ceiling beams. The fire in the hearth jumped and scattered embers across the stone. My first thought was earthquake, but the shaking stopped as abruptly as it had started, and the silence that followed was absolute. No aftershocks, no settling creaks, just a profound stillness that felt intentional, deliberate. I grabbed the rifle and stood, my legs shaking, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The generator was running. I had started it at dusk as usual, and its light cast harsh shadows across the cabin walls, making everything look unfamiliar, threatening. I went to the window and looked out. At first I saw nothing unusual, just the clearing, the woodpile, the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. But then I noticed the lights. Not the lights from the cabin spilling out into the darkness, but lights coming from outside, flickering and pulsing in an irregular pattern. The generator was creating a strobe effect, the bulbs dimming and brightening with each surge of power. And in those moments of illumination, I could see it. Standing between the old barn and the well, completely still, was a figure. Even at a distance, even in the uncertain light, its size was staggering. It stood easily over 7 feet tall, maybe 8, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the landscape behind it. The body was covered in dark fur or hair that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, making the figure appear as a void, a hole cut into reality. But it was the way it stood, perfectly upright, perfectly balanced, with a posture that suggested both strength and weariness, that made my breath catch. I could not move, could not think, could only stand there with my face pressed against the cold glass, watching. The figure did not move either. It simply stood there, and even though I could not see its eyes in the darkness, I knew that it was looking directly at me. The moment stretched out, seconds becoming minutes, time losing all meaning in the charged space between us. And then it spoke. The voice carried across the distance between us, clear and undistorted, as if the speaker were standing right beside me. It was impossibly deep, resonating in a frequency I felt in my chest more than heard with my ears. The words were in English, precise and deliberate, each one weighted with significance. They lied, just those 2 words. They lied. Not an accusation directed at me, but a statement of fact, delivered with the kind of bone-deep certainty that comes from lived experience. The voice carried emotions I could identify: anger, betrayal, a profound exhaustion, but also something else, something I did not have words for. A recognition, perhaps, an understanding that I was being told something important, something I needed to know. I wanted to respond, to ask what it meant, who had lied, what truth had been hidden. But before I could form the words, before I could even open my mouth, I heard a new sound, the distant thrumming of helicopter blades cutting through the night air. The sound grew rapidly louder, more insistent, coming from the direction of the mountains. And then I saw them, searchlights, brilliant and white, sweeping across the valley like the fingers of some mechanical god. The creature, I cannot think of another word for it, inadequate as it may be, turned its head toward the approaching sound. For a moment I thought it might stand its ground, might face whatever was coming. But then, with a movement so sudden it seemed to blur, it spun and ran toward the tree line. The speed was impossible for something so large, so apparently heavy. It crossed the clearing in seconds, the searchlights following, trying to track it, and then it disappeared into the forest. The helicopters, there were 2 of them, I realized, circled overhead. their rotors creating a wind that bent the trees and sent debris skittering across the ground. The searchlights crisscrossed the forest, probing between the trunks, searching. I stood at the window frozen, watching this military precision being applied to hunting something that should not exist. And then, as quickly as they had arrived, the helicopters veered away, following the tree line toward the north, and the sound of them faded into the distance. The silence that returned was different from before. It was not peaceful or neutral. It was the silence of aftermath, of consequence, heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. I stood there for a long time, maybe an hour, watching the empty clearing, waiting to see if anything else would happen. But nothing did. The night returned to its usual state, dark and still, as if the last 10 minutes had been a hallucination, a waking dream brought on by stress and isolation. But I knew it had been real. The earth where the creature had stood was disturbed. I could see that even in the poor light, and when I finally worked up the courage to go outside at first light, I found proof. The ground was scorched in a rough circle about 6 feet in diameter, the grass blackened and brittle, the soil underneath baked hard. It looked like something had been burned there, incinerated with tremendous heat, though there was no smell of smoke, no residue of fuel or accelerant. Just this circle of destruction, precise and inexplicable. I knelt beside it, running my fingers over the charred earth, and felt a grief I could not articulate. Something had happened here, something significant, and I was only a witness to it, unable to understand or prevent or help. The creature's words echoed in my mind. They lied, and I wondered what truth it had been trying to convey, what deception it was calling attention to. The tire tracks appeared later that morning, fresh, deep, clearly visible in the soft earth near the creek. Multiple vehicles, heavy ones, had come through during the night or early morning, while I was still processing what I had seen. They had parked, conducted some kind of operation, and then left, all without me noticing. The realization that I had been so absorbed in my own experience that I had missed this additional intrusion was disturbing. How much else had I missed? What other activities had been occurring around me, invisible or ignored? The official visit started the next day. 3 men in dark suits, government issue but lacking any visible identification, arrived in an unmarked sedan around noon. They were polite but insistent, asking if I was feeling well, if I had been taking my medications, if I had experienced any unusual stress or confusion lately. I told them I did not take medications. They exchanged glances, consulted a tablet one of them was carrying, and insisted that I was supposed to be on a prescription for anxiety and age-related cognitive decline. I told them my doctor had never prescribed me anything of the sort. They smiled, the kind of smiles that do not reach the eyes, and said perhaps I had forgotten. One of them asked about my cameras. I said I used them to photograph wildlife. He asked if he could see them. I said no. He asked again, more firmly. I repeated my refusal, and this time they did not smile. One of them walked to his car and returned with a document, a warrant as he claimed, though I had no time to read it properly before he was collecting my cameras, my computer, my audio recorders, everything. They said it was for analysis, that they would return it all once they had determined there were no security concerns. I asked what kind of security concerns they were talking about. They did not answer. They loaded everything into their car and drove away, leaving me standing in my yard, feeling violated and helpless and impossibly small. The cameras were never returned. Neither was the computer. When I called the number they had left, if it was even a real number, a recorded message told me the mailbox was full and could not accept new messages. I tried several times over the following weeks, always with the same result. Eventually, I stopped trying. But the visits continued. Different men each time, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs, always with the same questions about my health, my mental state, my medication compliance. They seemed particularly interested in whether I had told anyone about what I had seen. I lied and said I had not. They seemed satisfied with that answer, or at least willing to accept it, and the visits became less frequent. I began to understand that I was being managed, kept under observation, quietly suppressed. Whatever had happened that night, whatever that creature was, whatever the government knew about it, was information they intended to keep contained. And I was a loose end, a witness who needed to be controlled or discredited or both. My son called a week later. Someone had contacted him, he said, expressing concern about my welfare. They had suggested I might benefit from professional care, perhaps in a facility where I could receive proper supervision. He asked, with the careful tone of someone trying not to provoke a difficult parent, if I had been experiencing any problems lately. Confusion, hallucinations, paranoid thinking. I told him I was fine. He did not believe me. He came to visit, spent an afternoon walking around the property, looking at me with that particular mixture of love and worry that adult children reserve for aging parents. He suggested I sell the cabin, move closer to him, let him help take care of me. I refused. We argued. The kind of argument where nothing gets resolved and everyone leaves feeling worse than when they started. He drove away angry, and I stood on the porch watching his taillights disappear, knowing I had damaged something between us that might never fully heal. But what could I tell him? That I had seen something impossible, that the government was covering it up, that I was being watched and managed and slowly erased? He would think I was insane. He would call doctors, lawyers, arrange for me to be committed for my own protection. And maybe he would be right to do so. Maybe I was insane. Maybe the isolation had finally broken something essential in my mind, and everything I thought I had experienced was just elaborate delusion. But the scorched earth was still there. The tire tracks were still visible when the rain had not washed them away. The absence of my cameras and computer was real and physical. These were not hallucinations. These were facts, concrete and undeniable. Something had happened, and I was caught in its wake and powerless to do anything but endure. At night, I would sit by the fire and think about the creature's words. They lied. The phrase had become a mantra, something I turned over and over in my mind, examining from every angle. Who had lied? About what? To whom? Was it the government, concealing the existence of these beings? Was it science, pretending to know the limits of what was possible? Or was it something deeper, more fundamental, humanity itself, lying to itself about its place in the world, about what else might share this planet with us? I had no answers, only questions, and the growing certainty that seeking answers would cost me everything I had left, my sanity, my freedom, perhaps even my life. But I could not stop. The need to know, to understand, had become as essential as breathing. I was caught now, trapped between the impossible thing I had witnessed and the impossible situation I found myself in, and there was no path forward that did not lead to some form of ruin. I'm writing this because I know, with the kind of certainty that settles into your bones and becomes indistinguishable from truth, that my time is running out. Not in the dramatic sense of immediate danger, but in the slow, bureaucratic way that modern disappearances happen, through institutionalization, through the gradual erosion of autonomy, through the systematic dismantling of credibility, until nothing remains but the official narrative. They will come for me soon, I think. Perhaps tomorrow, perhaps next week. And when they do, this will be all that is left of what I witnessed, what I know to be true, even if no one else believes it. The attempts to have me committed began subtly. Phone calls from concerned citizens I had never met, reporting erratic behavior they could not have possibly witnessed. Letters from medical professionals I had never consulted, recommending treatment for conditions I had never been diagnosed with. My son, bewildered and frightened, telling me that people were saying things about me, that there were concerns about my welfare, that maybe, just maybe, it would be good for me to talk to someone, to get help. The pressure was constant, gentle but relentless, like water wearing down stone. I tried to tell him what happened once. We were sitting on the porch, drinking coffee, and I thought that if I could just explain it clearly enough, rationally enough, he would understand. I described the creature, the helicopters, the men in suits, the confiscated evidence. I watched his face close, saw the shutters come down behind his eyes, saw him transform from my son into someone looking at a stranger, someone dangerous and unpredictable. He left earlier than planned that day. He has not been back since. Maybe he was right to leave. Maybe I had become dangerous, not to others, but to the comfortable illusions we all maintain to get through the day. The illusion that we understand the world we live in, that we have catalogued and categorized everything that exists, that there are no more mysteries left, only problems waiting to be solved. I had become living proof that this illusion was false, and people do not like having their illusions challenged. They will go to great lengths to preserve them, even at the cost of someone else's freedom or sanity. I think about those two words constantly now. They lied. I turn them over in my mind like stones, examining every facet, every possible meaning. The more I consider them, the more layers I discover. On the surface, it is a simple accusation. Someone, somewhere, has concealed the truth about these beings, these creatures that walk upright through our forests and watch us from the shadows. The government, almost certainly. How long have they known? How many witnesses have been silenced or discredited? How much evidence has been destroyed? But there is a deeper truth there too, one that has nothing to do with government conspiracies or covered-up evidence. The lie is in what we tell ourselves about our place in the world, about our uniqueness, our dominion, our separation from everything else that lives and breathes. We have built our entire civilization on the assumption that we are alone at the top, that consciousness and intelligence and self-awareness are exclusively human traits. And when confronted with evidence to the contrary, we reject it not because it lacks proof, but because accepting it would require us to rebuild everything from the ground up. That creature, that being I saw standing in my yard, speaking in perfect English, carrying in its eyes a sorrow deeper than I have words for, it was a mirror held up to everything we pretend not to see. It was aware. It was intelligent. It understood deception and truth and the weight of both. And it was being hunted, pursued with the kind of systematic efficiency we reserve for things we fear, things that threaten the stories we tell about ourselves. I have come to understand that the horror I experienced was not in seeing something impossible. The horror was in recognizing how desperately we cling to our lies, how violently we defend them, how completely we are willing to destroy evidence and silence witnesses to maintain them. The creature was not the threat. Our inability to accept its existence was the threat. Our need to remain the sole inheritors of consciousness, the only beings that matter, the undisputed masters of this world, that need is so strong it overrides evidence, reason, compassion. The footsteps stopped several weeks ago. The tapping on the walls, the breathing near the windows, the sense of being observed, all of it ceased abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped. At first I was relieved. The fear that had become my constant companion began to recede, and I thought perhaps I could return to some version of my old life, my quiet routine of wood chopping and deer feeding and watching sunsets over the valley. But the relief quickly gave way to something worse, a profound, aching loneliness. I realized that I missed them, missed the sense of being noticed, of mattering to something beyond myself. The creatures had acknowledged my existence in a way that other humans no longer did. They had seen me, truly seen me, while my own species looked through me as if I were invisible, or worse, as if I were something to be managed and contained. I find myself going to the spot where the earth was scorched, sitting beside it, running my fingers over the blackened soil. It has not grown back, even though months have passed and grass should have returned by now. The circle remains, a permanent scar on the landscape, a reminder of what was there and what was taken away. Sometimes I talk to it, to the absence, as if the creature might somehow still be listening. I apologize for filming them, for violating their privacy, for being part of the species that cannot let anything remain unknown, unexploited, unconquered. I do not expect forgiveness. I do not even know if such a concept applies to beings so unlike us, with their own ways of understanding the world and their place in it. But I say it anyway, because it is the only thing I can think to do, the only gesture that feels remotely adequate to the magnitude of what I witnessed and what I have become because of it. The truth, I have learned, does not set you free. That is perhaps the greatest lie we tell ourselves, that knowledge is liberation, that understanding brings peace, that seeing clearly is its own reward. The truth isolates. It separates you from everyone who has not seen what you have seen, who cannot believe what you know to be real. It marks you as other, as damaged, as someone who can no longer be trusted to perceive reality correctly. And once you are marked that way, there is no going back. The world closes around you like a fist, and you realize that ignorance was never the prison. Knowledge is. I've paid the price for what I know. My family thinks I am insane. My neighbors avoid me. The government watches me, waiting for me to become enough of a problem to justify more extreme measures. I have no proof left. They took it all, erased it all, made it as if none of it ever existed. Just my word against their silence. And we all know how that story ends. If someone finds this notebook, and I pray someone does, even though I know the likelihood is small, I hope they will understand what I am trying to say. Not that I saw a monster in the woods, though I did. Not that the government is hiding the truth, though they are. But that the real horror, the thing that keeps me awake at night now that the creatures have stopped visiting, is realizing how fragile our consensus reality is, how easily it can be shattered, and how mercilessly we punish those who dare to see through it. We are so small, we humans, so proud of our cities and our technologies and our presumed dominance. But there are things in this world, ancient things, hidden things, things that have learned to avoid our notice, that know better. They watch us from the margins, from the deep forests and the high mountains, and they understand something we refuse to accept, that we are not the only ones here, not the only ones who matter, not the only ones who have a right to exist undisturbed. The creature's sorrow haunts me most of all. Not its size or its strangeness, but that look in its eyes, the exhaustion, the resignation, the bone-deep weariness of being hunted, studied, denied even the dignity of acknowledged existence. I recognize that look because I see it in my own eyes now when I catch my reflection in the window at night. We are both ghosts, both erased, both forced to exist in the gaps between what is permitted and what is real. I'm 74 years old, and I do not know how much time I have left. My body is failing in ways I cannot ignore anymore. The cough has gotten worse, the dizziness more frequent, the pain in my chest more insistent. Perhaps I will die here, in this cabin, before they come to take me away. Part of me hopes for that, hopes to avoid the indignity of institutionalization, of being medicated and monitored until I can no longer remember what I saw or why it mattered. But whether I die here or in some sterile room with white walls and locked doors, the truth remains. I saw them. They were real. They spoke to me. And everything I was told about the world, everything I was taught to believe about what was possible and what was not, was based on lies. Comfortable lies, perhaps. Necessary lies, maybe. But lies nonetheless. The price of truth is absolute solitude. It is the knowledge that you will die alone with what you know, that no one will believe you, that your experience will be dismissed and your memory discredited. It is the understanding that the world would rather sacrifice you than adjust its understanding of what is real. And it is the terrible, isolating awareness that you would not choose differently even knowing the cost. Because once you have seen clearly, you cannot unsee, cannot unknow, cannot return to the comforting blindness that everyone else still enjoys. I have paid that price in full. The forest is empty now. The creatures gone to wherever it is they go when humans come too close. The helicopters still fly overhead sometimes, reminding me that the watchers are still watching, that my window of freedom is closing, and I sit here by the fire writing these words, hoping they will survive even if I do not, hoping they will reach someone who needs to hear them. If you are reading this, you need to know. The world is larger and stranger than they tell you. There are things in the shadows that see you, even when you cannot see them, and the worst monsters are not the ones in the forest. They are the ones who deny the forest's mysteries, who would rather destroy wonder than admit they were wrong. Do not make my mistake. Do not try to prove what you have seen. Proof is a curse. It makes you a target, a threat, something to be neutralized. If you see something impossible, hold it inside. Let it change you quietly. Let it remake your understanding without announcing it to a world that is not ready and will never be ready. The rain is starting again, drumming on the tin roof, and the fire is burning low. I will add another log, I think, and then I will close this notebook and hide it where it might be found someday by someone who will understand. My time here is ending. I can feel it in my bones, in the way the silence has changed, in the quality of the light that filters through the trees. They lied to us all, and I was punished for seeing through the lie, but I do not regret it. Not entirely, not yet, because for one moment, standing at my window in the darkness, I saw something true, something real, something that mattered more than comfort or safety or the approval of people who have never had to question what they know. The truth isolated me. It destroyed my life. It will probably destroy my memory too, when the official reports are filed and the story is written without my voice in it. But it was worth it. God help me, despite everything, it was worth it. The fire crackles. The rain falls, and somewhere in the darkness beyond my windows, the forest keeps its secrets, as it always has, as it always will.